how many times has this happened to anyone? You're seated in your room quietly in a corner all by yourself, and all of a sudden, across the room, you see a spider on the wall. You slowly move as not to alert it, to grab anything in distance to throw at it as to kill it, right? But as you look away for half a millisecond, it's gone. What's the next logical thing that you do? You burn your house down. You can't live there anymore with that spider somewhere in there. I believe that our country, in the same way, has taken actions. I believe that our country, in the same way, has gone into this mindset that produces a toxic environment, and that is why I propose to you that actions taken against illegal immigrants, especially those of Mexican descent, is blown out of proportion. And I will show you this by looking at three main points. First, that illegal immigration fluctuates with economic shifts. Secondly, by seeing how Donald Trump exacerbates the problem of a false threat. And lastly, by seeing how toxic measures enacted are creating greater foreign affair complications. First of all, we see how illegal immigration fluctuates with economic shifts. So our economy, starting from 2000, has grown bit by year, excluding the year of the 2009 recession. The balance reports that in 2000 we had a total growth rate of 4.1%, and in 2009 we had a loss of 2.5%, and then in 2017 we had a 2.2%. Rates of immigration continue to decline throughout the years from 2000, being the lowest in the decades. We went from having 1.6 million immigrants in 2000 deported to having 130,454 in 2017. That is a dramatic decrease in immigrants deported. Doctor of Immigration Audrey Singer says that when the U.S. economic growth slowed during the recession, so did migration from Mexico. However, the perception that the border was out of control remained. This is still true today. We see people constantly in battle over immigration issues and whether or not they are big or not. Along with this, Clark Scholar reports that more Mexicans voluntarily departed from the U.S. for Mexico than entered the country from 2009 to 2014. This further proves my point that the recession, that immigration fluctuates with economic shifts. The recession in 2009 made more Mexicans return to Mexico than those that entered the country. Secondly, we will see how Donald Trump exacerbates the problem of a false threat. He continues to badmouth the entire Mexican community, as we see how Washington Post reports from one of his speeches. He says that when Mexico sends their people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, bringing crime, bringing rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. First off, the problem is that he makes a stereotype of the Mexican people, starting with the bad thing. He allows people to see a demonic side of what he considers to be an entire community, and lastly says some of them might be good people. His point in making this is that he wants to build his famous Trump wall. With this Trump wall, he wants to build a false sense of security for the American people. When he did not get funding for his wall, he later declared a government shutdown, which was the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. The shutdown affected 80,000 federal employees, many who live paycheck to paycheck, as the New York Times reports. And also, this did not only affect federal employees, but many everyday citizens and other people. The FDA stopped routine inspections of food. Native Americans stopped receiving assistance, or it was slowed. National parks shut down, and many court hearings were canceled. Although Trump promises that his Trump wall will make immigration slow down, Bob Brown, expert on drug-related violence, reports that Trump's proposed wall would do little to curb drug flow from Mexico and to the United States, nor would it promote security. His plan to build a wall has no greatly positive effect that it would bring to the United States for the cost that he proposes. Lastly, we will see how toxic measures enacted are creating greater foreign affairs complications. Recently, we had a bill passed in Congress that is named the Alien Gang and Criminal Act that would allow people to be deported off the suspicion of criminal activity. Now this is pretty vague. You're leaving your entire life up to a person who doesn't know you and just sees you for like the color of your skin. If you anyone who looks at you and thinks that you look bad or look a certain way, this would literally allow them to deport you just by the way you look. It would allow, GovTrack states that it would allow for the deportation or detainment of immigrants already or suspected of gang involvement. Trump's wall poses a lot of problems with Mexico, and we can see that with problems that have already occurred, such as NAFTA problems that in renewing the NAFTA. Trump believed that this was a bad deal for many Americans and wanted to pull out of the agreement. But New York Times reports that American automakers are especially reliant on parts imported from overseas, but other industries, including agriculture, energy, and retail, would also be affected. He says that this will bring more jobs, but relies on companies bringing those jobs to American and not exporting them overseas. This would also affect cars, apparel, agriculture, and medical devices. With these points, I hope to prove to you that actions taken against illegal immigrants, especially those Mexican descent, is well out of proportion. Thank you.
All right, well, the propositions identified, I do think it's a little complicated in the way it's phrased, and there's got to be a simpler way of expressing it, but you do a good job previewing what the supporting points are going to be, so we know what's going on there. The fact that the immigration fluctuates, I think that we still need to have an inference drawn from that. That simply sounds like it's data. What is the inference that you want us to draw from that? That immigration is not related to a long-term issue, that it's only economically motivated, that the notion that that there's a a mass exodus of people into, or influx of people into the country that is altering the substance of the country is largely exaggerated. I think that's kind of what you're hinting at, but you need to make that a little bit clearer. Basically, it just turns into some data about how the immigration rate rises and falls, in particular in relationship to the economic situation. And I think that's good information, but what does it mean? That's what is missing here. The second point about Trump's exaggeration creates additional problems. There's the stereotyping. You describe some of the things that Trump has said and done that suggest that it creates particular kinds of problems. I think we need a demonstration of what those problems happen to be. Maybe polarized opinions or protests in the street, or there's a lack of willingness to cooperate with Trump in legislative action, something along those lines. Otherwise, it's just him mouthing off, and why do we care about that particular point? There could be consequences to it, and I think that's the thing that needs to go on. You also kind of have an argument here about the wall. If you want, it might be simpler to make that second point about the wall and argue that the wall is going to be ineffective. It'll fail to prevent the problems that Trump wants to fix there. And I think that would be a more direct way of going at that issue. You could probably cut out most of the other stuff because it doesn't really seem to have much impact anyway. It seems like it's an emotional, provocative kind of statement that you're taking advantage of here, which doesn't necessarily apply to the argument about whether or not the wall works or is necessary. Which I think does apply to your argument. And then the foreign affairs issue, well, you also did mention the shutdown thing, and the shutdown, of course, is related to the wall, and that's a complication. I think that does kind of fit in with your notion that things get overblown and out of proportion here. There's probably a larger context to look at, but I think that that's a reasonable illustration. The foreign affairs complications, I didn't think that you got a very clear explanation of the NAFTA issue and how it's related to this particular point. That feels like it's underdeveloped and it's mostly confusing. So I think you either have to get to it earlier and give us a more complete explanation, or simplify and stick to the 2 points that you had some time for. All right, thank you.